The morning had started like any other for Corinne Whitmore, which meant it had started with resentment. Her alarm went off at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her official wake-up time, a habit born from a lifetime of anxiety. She lay in bed in her Westchester townhouse, staring at the popcorn ceiling she'd been meaning to have smoothed for 3 years, mentally calculating her schedule before her feet hit the cold hardwood floor. Corinne was 53 years old, divorced twice, and the kind of woman who kept meticulous spreadsheets for everything: grocery budgets, her daughter's college fund, even a color-coded system for her spice rack. Her friends called her detail-oriented. Her ex-husbands called her worse things. Her daughter Madison, currently a junior at NYU, barely called it all. The drive to her job at Dalton and Associates, a mid-tier marketing firm where she'd worked for 12 years without a promotion, usually took 45 minutes. Today, she'd need to fill up. The gas tank had been hovering at a quarter for 3 days. Corinne had been running calculations in her head about the most efficient route that consumed the fewest miles while still getting her where she needed to go. Efficiency was the religion she'd built her life around. She showered in exactly 9 minutes, blow-dried her hair in 7, and applied her makeup with the precision of someone who'd been doing it wrong her whole life and had finally found the one correct way. Everything matched. Her neutral blazer matched her neutral blouse, which matched her neutral personality, or so she thought. Corinne didn't see herself as remarkable. She saw herself as correct. There was a difference. The Chevron station was on her way to work, and it was 6:58 a.m. when she pulled in. The morning was cold, the air carrying that particular bite of early October that made you think about death, about endings, about how quickly a year could slip away from you. Corinne pulled up to Pump 7. She always used Pump 7 when it was available, had used it for 4 years, had a routine with it, and stepped out into the crystalline morning light. The display on the pump still showed prices from yesterday. She waited for it to refresh, watching the numbers cycle through. Then she saw it. $6.79 per gallon. She blinked. The numbers didn't change. She looked at the pump next to her, the one across. All of them, $6.79, $6.89, $6.94. Corinne's chest tightened. That wasn't possible. Yesterday morning, when she'd checked online, prices were holding at $3.47. Yes, prices had been climbing all month. Yes, she'd been furious about it, had mentioned it to everyone at work, had posted about it in her neighborhood Facebook group where 12 other people had agreed with her. But this was something else. She pulled her phone out. Stock market news, gas futures, everything. The national average was $4.12. California was higher, but $6.79 in Westchester. That was. Pump's broken, someone said. Corinne turned. A man in a Mercedes was looking at the display board on the station entrance, then back at her. No, she said, pointing at Pump 7. Look, all of them. The man's face went pale. He got back in his car and left. Corinne stood there, pump handle in her hand, and felt something crack inside her. Not dramatically. It was subtle, like the hairline fracture in a windshield that you don't notice until suddenly the entire thing spiders apart. She thought about her daughter's tuition. She thought about how she'd had to ask Madison to take out additional student loans this semester because the endowment from her father's estate had been smaller than expected. She thought about her own car, 6 years old, still solid, but the transmission was starting to make noises. She thought about the fact that she'd been saving for a replacement, and that replacement was slipping further away with every passing month. She thought about waking up at 53 years old and realizing that despite everything, the spreadsheets, the efficiency, the correctness, she was drowning. She filled her tank. It took 30 gallons. She watched the numbers climb: $150, $160, $170, $180, $187.43. For regular unleaded, for a 2018 Chevrolet Equinox. Her hands were shaking when she went inside to pay. The attendant, a young man with tired eyes, didn't meet her gaze. She understood why. She could feel the rage radiating from her like heat from an oven. The prices, she said, those are. Out of my control, he said quietly. Who set them? The owner. It's a franchise. He gets an email with the recommended prices from the distributor. He can go higher if he wants. Why would he want to? The young man looked at her for the first time, and there was something almost gentle in his exhaustion. Because he can, he said. Corinne paid. She got back in her car. She sat in the parking lot for 7 minutes, her hands on the steering wheel, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. She was not supposed to lose her temper. Corinne Whitmore was a professional. She was calm. She was reasonable. She had never raised her voice at work or at home or anywhere that mattered. She had swallowed things, so many things, because that was what you did when you were a woman trying to move through the world without making waves. But something in her had finally run out of room. She pulled out her phone and Googled gas price gouging complaint. A lot of results about filing complaints with the Attorney General. A lot of results about class action lawsuits. A lot of results about how most states had no legal upper limit on gas prices, so technically nothing illegal was happening. But there should be something, she thought. There should be someone who could do something. She Googled report gas price gouging. And then, without really thinking about what she was doing, or maybe thinking about it precisely, in that moment of crystalline clarity that comes right before we do something we regret, she dialed 911. It rang once, twice. 911, operator, VO. 911, what's your emergency? Corinne opened her mouth, then she closed it, then she opened it again. I'm reporting price gouging, she said. At a gas station, Chevron on Riverside Drive. They're charging $6.79 a gallon. I think that's illegal. That has to be illegal. There was a pause. She could hear the operator processing. 911 operator. Ma'am, is there an active threat? Is anyone hurt? No, but... 911 operator. Is there a robbery or crime in progress? I don't know, but this is exploitative. This is taking advantage of people. This is... 911 operator. Ma'am, 911 is for emergencies, for crimes in progress. You need to contact your local consumer protection agency if you believe. But Corinne had already hung up. She sat in her car in the parking lot and realized what she'd done. She'd called 911 about gas prices. She'd actually done it. The part of her brain that monitored propriety, that constantly calibrated what was appropriate and what was excessive, was now screaming at her. She'd humiliated herself. She'd wasted emergency services time. She was one of those people now, the kind of woman that podcasts mocked, that social media laughed at. She should have felt shame, but instead she felt something worse. She felt justified. She felt like someone had finally picked up the phone. 2 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled into the parking lot. Not to respond to her call, they wouldn't send a car for that, but on routine patrol, and her vehicle, parked with its engine still running in a gas station lot, caught their attention. That was what the officer would explain later. That was what would appear in the incident report. But what Corinne thought as she watched the red and blue lights pull in behind her, as she watched a female officer step out of the cruiser and walk toward her with a particular kind of controlled pace that spoke to 20 years of dealing with people at their absolute lowest moments, was that the universe was answering her call. She had no idea how wrong she was. Officer Sarah Chen had been on the Westchester police force for 21 years, and she had developed a near-supernatural ability to read people. It was part training, part intuition, part the accumulated weight of 2 decades of human desperation. She could look at a person and know almost instantly what kind of bad decision they were in the process of making. She saw Corinne Whitmore sitting in her car, hands on the steering wheel, shoulders tensed up to her ears, and immediately understood. Here was a woman who had finally broken. Sarah had seen it before. The pandemic had accelerated it, had compressed a decade's worth of social decay into months. People had been pushed to their limit and then kept being pushed. They broke in different ways. Some got loud. Some got violent. Some just sat in parked cars and shook. What she didn't expect was for this woman to roll down her window and immediately say, "I called you." "Ma'am," Sarah kept her tone flat, neutral, the tone she used for people who were beginning to lose the thread. "I called 911 about the gas prices. You came to investigate." Sarah looked at the gas station. She looked back at Corinne. She understood the confusion at the core of this woman, the absolute conviction that because she had called, because she had done the official thing, someone would come and fix it. "Why don't you step out of the vehicle?" Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Corinne got out. She was a medium-height woman with carefully maintained appearance, the kind of person who believed that if you controlled the external, the internal would follow. Sarah could see the moment Karen realized that no amount of control was going to get her out of this situation. "I want to report what's happening at that station," Karen said, pointing at the chevron. "Those prices are exploitative. I looked it up. During emergencies, states have authority to enforce price caps. My cousin is a lawyer in Connecticut, and he said—" "What's your name?" Sarah interrupted. "Karen Whitmore." "Karen, did the dispatcher tell you that 911 is for emergencies?" "Well, yes, but I considered this." "Did you?" Sarah moved closer, and she could see Karen's pupils dilate slightly. "What exactly is the emergency?" "People are being cheated." "By who?" "The station owner, the oil companies, the system, someone." Sarah looked at the pump display from where she stood. She could read the numbers from here, had already seen them when she'd pulled in. She'd filled her own tank that morning and watched the same numbers cycle through. She knew what this was about. "Okay," Sarah said, and she kept her voice gentle because cruelty wasn't her style and because she could already see where this was going. "I'm going to explain something to you, and I need you to really hear it. Gas prices, the prices you see on that board, those are perfectly legal. They might make you angry. They should make you angry, but they're not a crime. The owner of that station can charge whatever the market will bear. That's not price gouging. That's just capitalism." "That can't be right." "It is right." "But my daughter—" Karen stopped. Her voice had cracked, and Sarah watched her swallow hard. "My daughter's tuition, my car, I can't afford." Sarah understood what she was seeing now. This wasn't a Karen in the traditional sense, wasn't a woman calling in a noise complaint or demanding to speak to a manager. This was a woman who had quietly, politely, correctly handled every financial problem in her life, had made peace with scarcity and difficulty, and had finally hit a wall. The wall wasn't the gas prices. The wall was realizing that politeness and correctness weren't going to save her. "Here's what I need to tell you," Sarah said. "You wasted emergency services time. That's a crime. It's not a big one, but it's technically illegal. In some jurisdictions, false reports can result in a fine or even jail time." She saw Karen's face go white. "However," Sarah continued, "I'm not going to cite you. I'm not going to take you in, because I think you're having a bad morning, and I think you've been having bad mornings for a long time. But here's what I'm going to suggest. Go back into that gas station. I want you to walk up to that pump. I want you to read me the price, out loud, all of it." Karen stared at her. "Why?" "Because I want you to hear yourself say it. I want you to understand that the price is what it is, and that saying it out loud doesn't change it, and that at some point, and I think maybe that point is today, you have to accept that there are things you can't fix. You can't legislate the market. You can't call 911 on capitalism. You can't make the world fair by being the one person who finally says something." There was a long moment of silence. Sarah could see Karen's mind working, could see the precise moment when the woman realized that she'd been humiliated in a way that couldn't be unhumiliated. "I'm not reading you the pump price," Karen said quietly. "Then we have a problem," Sarah said. "Because if you don't cooperate, I'm going to have to cite you for filing a false emergency report. And then we're done here, but we're done in a way that becomes a record. And those records follow you. Job applications, background checks, security clearances, it becomes part of your life." She watched Karen process this, the calculation happening behind those careful, controlled eyes. "You're trying to humiliate me," Karen said. "No," Sarah said, and she meant it. "I'm trying to teach you something. There's a difference." Karen walked back to the pump. Sarah followed, her body language exactly measured to be neither threatening nor encouraging, just present, just witness. Karen reached the pump. She looked at the display. She opened her mouth. $6.79 per gallon, she said quietly. "Louder," Sarah said. "I want to make sure I hear you." Karen's hands had started to shake, but she repeated it louder this time. $6.79 per gallon, she said to the pump, to the officer, to the universe. "Regular unleaded." "What did you pay?" $187.43. "For how many gallons?" 36.37, somewhere around there. "So the math is correct. The pump is working correctly, the price is set, and it's legal. Do you understand?" Karen stood in front of the pump with her eyes closed. "Yes," she said. "Good," Sarah said. "Here's my advice. Don't call 911 again about gas prices. Don't call anyone about it. Accept it, budget differently, or find another way to handle it." but don't spend your limited energy fighting a war you can't win. It'll destroy you faster than the price will. She turned to walk back to her cruiser, but Corinne's voice stopped her. You enjoyed that, Corinne said. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. Sarah turned back. She considered lying, then decided against it. A little bit, she admitted. Not because you're you, but because I see you all the time. I see people calling about things they can't control, trying to fix the world one emergency at a time, and it breaks my heart. So sometimes I try to show them what that looks like from the outside. By humiliating them. By making them really see, Sarah corrected. Sometimes that feels like the same thing. She got back in her cruiser and drove away, leaving Corinne standing in front of Pump 7 with her receipt and her shame, and the beginning of something she didn't quite have a name for yet. What Sarah didn't see, because she was already pulling out of the parking lot, was Corinne's face as she watched the police car leave. The expression that crossed it wasn't just humiliation or anger. It was calculation. Corinne was thinking about Officer Chen, about the way she'd said certain things with such certainty, about the casual authority with which she'd explained the world, and about the fact that the world she'd described wasn't actually the one that existed. Because Corinne had looked it up. While Officer Chen was explaining capitalism, Corinne had remembered something her cousin had told her, something about price gouging, something about how the definition existed in New York State, and it specifically applied when vendors charged unconscionable prices during times of shortage or emergencies. And while gas prices nationwide had been rising, the distributor email that the young attendant had mentioned, Corinne had thought about that too. One distributor email setting all the prices. That suggested coordination. That suggested knowledge. That suggested something that might, depending on how you looked at it, be very much illegal. Officer Chen had assumed Corinne was just another frustrated person. Officer Chen had assumed Corinne didn't know how to look things up. Officer Chen had assumed wrong. Corinne walked back to her car. She didn't go to work. She called in sick, which she almost never did. Then she drove to the public library and sat down at a computer, and for the next 4 hours she began to gather evidence. She started with her receipt. Timestamp 6:58 a.m. She took a photo of it. She went back to the Chevron at 9 a.m. and took photos of the pump display, same prices. She did it again at noon, again at 3 p.m. She called other gas stations and wrote down their prices. She documented the difference. She looked up the distributor, looked up the owner's name, found that it was connected to a larger franchise operation. She searched for price gouging complaints in the state. She found the Attorney General's website. She read through statutes and definitions and precedent cases. And by 4 p.m., when she should have been at work, when she should have been finishing her quarterly report, when she should have been doing any of the thousand small, correct things that made up her life, Corinne Whitmore had compiled something that looked a lot like a case. She went home and created a file. She made a timeline. She documented her evidence. She wrote an email, very careful and very detailed, to the New York State Attorney General's office. She sent it at 4:47 p.m., just as her workday was ending. Just as Officer Chen was probably writing up the incident report that would note a potentially unstable woman with a gas station grievance and no clear emergency. Corinne didn't know what would come from it. She didn't expect anything. But she also didn't know that the AG's office had been getting similar complaints, multiple complaints. In the last 3 days alone, the price at that particular Chevron had nearly doubled. It was part of a pattern. It was part of a larger investigation that was already underway. The email Corinne sent, the evidence she'd compiled, the timestamp that placed her right there at 6:58 a.m., observing the beginning of what would later be termed systematic coordinated pricing anomalies. All of it went into a file. All of it became part of a case. Officer Sarah Chen, meanwhile, filed her incident report. Caller reported false emergency regarding gas prices. No crime in progress. Individual appears to be experiencing financial stress and possible escalation of anxiety issues. Advised against future 911 misuse. The report was filed, the case was closed. Neither of them knew what was coming. Neither of them understood that the game had already begun. Madison Whitmore FaceTimed her mother on a Thursday evening, which was unusual because Madison usually didn't call. Hadn't called, really, for months. and Corinne's heart had jumped into her throat the way it always did when she saw her daughter's name on the screen. "Hi, honey," Corinne said, already searching her daughter's face for signs of crisis. This was what she did now, what the last 3 weeks had taught her to do: look for the problems before they announced themselves. "Is everything okay?" Madison was in her dorm room, dressed in the kind of expensive casual outfit that somehow cost more than Corinne's entire wardrobe, and her expression had that particular blend of embarrassment and frustration that came when you had to ask your mother for something you didn't want to ask her for. "I'm fine," Madison said. "Mom, I need to talk to you about my tuition." Corinne's stomach clenched. "What about it?" "The payment went through, but it was short. Like $1,500 short. And the registrar's office called me asking about a balance, and I checked my email and there's a hold on my spring registration because—" "That doesn't make sense," Corinne said. She was already opening her banking app. "I paid it. I paid the full amount." "I know, but that's what they said, and I'm looking at my account and—" Madison paused. "Mom, did you make a second payment? Because I see 2 charges." Corinne scrolled through her transactions. There were the tuition payments, yes, but there was also something else. A charge from the previous Wednesday morning, $187.43, to Chevron. No, several charges to Chevron. $187.43, $156.67, $142.58. Gas, all gas. In the 3 weeks since her encounter with Officer Chen, Corinne's commute had changed. Without even consciously deciding to, she'd started charting new routes. Her car was older, less efficient. Getting to work now took more gas, more money. She'd been pulling money from her daughter's tuition fund to cover it. The realization of this fact hit her like a slap. "Mom," Madison's voice sounded small on the screen. "Mom, what happened?" "I'll fix it," Corinne said automatically. "I'll fix it tomorrow." "How will you fix it? It's Thursday. Tuition is locked in. I have 3 weeks until the spring semester starts." "I will fix it," Corinne repeated, and she heard her own voice go tight and controlled, the way it did when she was trying very hard not to cry. After Madison hung up, promising to look into emergency loans and explaining, with the careful condescension of a 20-year-old, that this was going to negatively affect her credit, Corinne sat on her couch in her empty townhouse and tried to understand how this had happened. She'd been so careful, she'd always been so careful. But 3 weeks of gas prices at $6.79 a gallon had eaten through her emergency fund. 3 weeks of taking slightly longer routes to get to work because the direct route was too expensive. Karen had actually calculated the fuel costs per mile, had added up. She'd been so focused on the prices, on the rightness of her complaint, on the investigation she was still documenting, that she hadn't noticed the tally being kept in real time on her bank account. She'd been playing detective while her life slowly fell apart. Corinne opened her laptop and checked the email address where she'd sent her complaint to the AG's office. No response, no acknowledgement. She checked the tracking page she'd found online for complaint status. Nothing. Then she called. It took 40 minutes to reach someone, a voice so distant and bureaucratic it might as well have been a robot. The woman, or possibly a man, Corinne couldn't quite tell, explained that the office received thousands of complaints and investigations took time and had Corinne filled out Form 447C with proper documentation, and had she filed a separate complaint with the Federal Trade Commission because price gouging could be a federal matter. No, she hadn't done any of those things. "You should probably do those," the voice said. "It would expedite things." Corinne filled out Form 447C at 11 p.m. She filed a complaint with the FTC. She created a spreadsheet tracking gas prices across 17 different stations in her area. She started a document on her personal website listing the price gouging patterns. By 2 a.m., she had created something that was no longer research. It was obsession. She called in sick to work the next day. She didn't go to the office. Instead, she drove to the Chevron 3 times, 6 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m., and photographed the prices. They'd gone up again, $6.99 now. She thought about Officer Chen, about the humiliation of being made to read the pump price out loud, about the way the officer had explained the world as though the world was simple and fixed, and not capable of changing based on someone's greed or desperation or need. She thought about the tone that Officer Chen had used, not angry, just tired, just certain. Corinne pulled into a Starbucks parking lot and did something she almost never did. She opened her social media accounts. She created a new Facebook post, not in the neighborhood group where she'd been carefully polite about price concerns, a public post. Price GOUGINGAT Chevron ON Riverside Drive, she wrote. Gas prices up to $6.99 gallon while stations across town are at $4.50. This is illegal. This is exploitation. She included photos. She included timestamps. She included the phrase, share if you're tired of being cheated. She hit post and felt her heart rate spike. Then she did something more dangerous. She emailed the post to local news outlets, to a blog that covered consumer issues, to her state representative. Within an hour, she'd received an automated response from a news station. Thank you for your tip. We'll look into it. She'd received nothing from her state representative. By the time she left the coffee shop, she had 14 shares and 3 comments. One from someone who said, "There's other cheaper stations, just go there." One from someone else who said, "This is what we get for voting Democrat." One from a woman named Patricia who said, "I pay the same price ATMY pump. Something needs to be done about this." Corinne felt a spark of something when she saw Patricia's comment. Not quite hope, not quite connection, but something like validation. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't the only one who saw this. She messaged Patricia. Within 20 minutes, they were texting. Within an hour, Patricia had sent her 3 more examples of high prices at nearby stations. Within 3 hours, they'd created a group chat with 2 other people. Within 1 day, Corinne had accidentally started an activist movement. By the end of that week, there were 17 people in the chat. By the end of the second week, there were 43. They were documenting prices, creating spreadsheets, filing complaints together. Corinne didn't notice in all of this that her work performance had deteriorated. She didn't notice that she'd missed 2 client meetings and that her boss had sent her 3 emails about her quarterly report being late. She didn't notice that she'd skipped lunch every day that week, not intentionally, just lost in the work of documenting a system she'd decided had wronged her. She did notice on a Tuesday morning that her boss called her into his office. Tom Dalton was 59 years old, had a soft belly and a habit of calling all his female employees ma'am in a way that wasn't quite respectful and wasn't quite patronizing. It was something else entirely. He motioned for her to sit down. "Corinne, I'm going to be direct," he said. "Your work lately has not been up to your usual standard." "I know, I'm sorry. I have something going on." "I don't need to know what it is," he said, and she heard the edge in his voice. "What I need to know is whether you're still committed to this job, because we have standards here. We have expectations." "I am committed," Corinne said. "I promise I'm just—" "You're just what?" She wanted to tell him. She wanted to explain about the prices, about the system, about the slow violence of being squeezed economically, and then told it's legal, about the way that when you finally try to do something about it, you're treated like you're crazy. Instead, she said, "I'll do better." Tom nodded and dismissed her. When she got back to her desk, there was an email from Madison. The subject line read, "We need to talk about tuition." Corinne's hands shook as she opened it. The message was short. "Mom, I talked to the registrar again and they said if the balance isn't paid by next Monday, I'll lose my spot in 3 of my spring classes. I looked into private loans, but I need a cosigner, and I didn't want to do that without asking you first. Can you help?" Corinne looked at her bank account. She opened her savings, she opened her checking, she did the math. She had $3,400 remaining. Madison needed $1,500. Her rent was $1,200. Her car payment was $320. Her car insurance was $180. Her phone, her internet, her utilities. By Monday, she would have $52 left. She could solve Madison's problem. She could pick her daughter up. She could be the mother who saved the day. But she wouldn't be able to get to work. She wouldn't be able to buy food. She wouldn't be able to do anything but sit in her apartment and watch the weeks unfold until she had another emergency, and then another, and then nothing left at all. Corinne looked back at the chat group, at Patricia and the others, at the spreadsheets they'd been creating, at the price differences they'd documented. And she made a decision. She didn't solve Madison's problem immediately. Instead, she called her daughter. "Mom, I thought you were busy at work," Madison said when she picked up. I am, Karen said, but I needed to call you. I need to tell you something. Over the next 20 minutes, Karen explained what had happened. She explained the prices at the Chevron. She explained her 911 call and Officer Chen's response. She explained the complaint she'd filed and the group she'd started. She explained what had happened with her bank account, what had happened with her job, what was happening to her. Madison listened quietly. Mom, she said finally, that sucks, but what does that have to do with my tuition? I'm telling you because I need you to know that I'm trying to do something. Something that matters, and it's taking my energy. And I'm sorry that's affecting you, but I need you to understand why. Mom, I know you're in school, I know you have your own life, but the world is squeezing us. It's squeezing everyone, and everyone just accepts it and moves forward and gets to retirement, if we're lucky, without ever pushing back. I can't do that anymore. I can't pretend it's normal. Another silence. What about my tuition? Madison asked. I'll figure it out. I'll take out a loan. I'll get a second job. I'll figure it out, but I'm not going to stop this. After she hung up, Karen realized she'd crossed a line. She'd stopped being the mother who solved problems and become the mother who asked her daughter to understand why the problems weren't being solved. She didn't know if that was brave or selfish. She did know that on Monday, she called the Chevron station and asked to speak to the manager. The manager's name was David Okonkwo, and he was 54 years old, and he'd owned this franchise for 11 years, and he was about to become the most hated man in Karen Whitmore's personal mythology. Karen walked in at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, printouts in her hands, and asked to speak to him. David was in his cramped back office, surrounded by fuel distribution reports and inventory sheets, and when Karen walked in with her folder and her evidence and her eyes that had taken on a particular gleam of righteousness, he immediately understood that he was in trouble. Karen Whitmore, she introduced herself, extending a hand that he didn't shake. I've been monitoring your prices. That's great, David said carefully. She laid out the printouts on his desk. Photographs of the pump display, timestamps, comparisons to other stations. The spreadsheet showing how his prices correlated with nothing except each other, how they'd climbed together, how they'd stayed aligned, how they suggested coordination. I've filed complaints with the state attorney general, the FTC, and my local news affiliate, Karen said. I have documentation showing that you've been charging unconscionable prices that constitute price gouging under New York State Penal Law Section 180.8. David looked at the printouts and felt something like sympathy for her. He knew what she was doing. She was looking for someone to blame for something that wasn't actually his fault, not entirely anyway. Ma'am, he said gently, I'm not the bad guy here. You're charging $6.99 for gas when stations 5 miles away are charging $4.50. I'm not charging those prices to hurt people. I'm charging those prices because that's what my distributor recommends. And I'm doing it because the margins are so thin on fuel that I need the volume or I need the markup. Then your system is immoral. Probably, David agreed. But it's not illegal. Have you called 911 again? He watched her face and saw the answer. You have, he said. I filed proper complaints through the system. But you also called 911. Karen's jaw tightened. On Monday morning, David continued, and he was looking at something on his computer, something he'd been checking when she walked in. Between 6 and 9 a.m., you called police non-emergency, that's on record, and you filed complaints with the AG, the FTC, and you've been organizing what appears to be some kind of campaign against this location. He turned his computer toward her. The spreadsheet, Karen's spreadsheet, the one she'd been maintaining, had been shared among 43 people in a group chat, and which had apparently been forwarded to someone else entirely, someone connected to the franchise corporate office. You think I'm price gouging because you look at the prices and they make you angry, David said. But what you don't understand is that the entire fuel industry is built on margins and volume and timing. Your anger doesn't change that. Your complaints don't change that. And what you're doing, this campaign, these complaints, this social media campaign, what that's doing is damaging the business based on a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding. You're charging illegal prices. Actually, David said, I've checked with the corporate office. I've checked with a lawyer. The prices I'm charging are steep, yes. They're higher than other stations, yes, but they're not illegal. Do you know why? He didn't wait for an answer. Because the law, the actual law that exists on paper and in courtrooms, defines price gouging as pricing that is both unconscionable and during a declared emergency. There's no declared emergency. Gas hasn't become unavailable. You're not being denied a product. You're just being charged more than you want to pay. That's a technicality. It's the law, David said, and then he said something that Karen didn't expect. You know what's actually happening. You know what's really going on. Karen didn't answer. I'm franchisee of a corporation that operates through exploitation. My distributor is owned by a parent company that has coordinated pricing strategies across regions. They set the price points. I just implement them. The corporate office sent me an email last month with recommended pricing that coincided with the price hikes across 17 stations in my region. If you want to prove price gouging, you need to go after corporate. You need to show coordination at the institutional level, not at my pump. He closed the folder of printouts. But instead, you're going after me, the franchisee, the guy who's just trying to keep his business afloat and his workers paid. Karen felt something shift inside her, not quite doubt, but something like it, a crack in the certainty she'd been building. You knew, she said. You knew that coordinating prices could constitute conspiracy. Probably, David admitted. But I'm one franchisee trying to survive. I'm not going to commit corporate fraud to prove a point. And frankly, ma'am, you don't have the power to make me do anything. You can complain to everyone from here to the state capitol, and nothing's going to change because what I'm doing is technically legal. He stood up, a signal that the meeting was over. One more thing, he said. Officer Chen, I know her. She comes to this station, gets coffee in the morning. She mentioned you. She said you seemed like someone who needed something to feel in control of. I don't think that's about the prices. I think that's about something else. I think you called 911 on me in gas stations because you could, because it was one place where you thought you could make a difference. But you couldn't, and now you're spiraling. Karen wanted to argue, but he'd already turned away, was already opening his office door to walk her out. As she stood in the parking lot looking at the pump displaying $6.99, she realized that David had done something worse than defend himself. He'd explained her. He'd taken her righteous anger and translated it into pathology. She'd wanted to be someone fighting a system. Instead, she was someone spiraling. The words echoed in her head over the next 3 days. She went to work. She didn't engage in the pricing investigation. She didn't check the group chat. She didn't respond to Patricia or the others. She made Madison a co-signer on an emergency private loan that would cost the family 17% in interest. She calculated the additional money she'd be paying back for years. That was when she called Officer Chen's direct line. She'd looked up the non-emergency number, had gotten the police station's main line, and explained the situation until they transferred her. This is Officer Chen, a bored voice answered. Hi, it's Karen, the woman from the Chevron 3 weeks ago. There was a pause. She could almost hear Officer Chen's memory accessing the incident, pulling it out of filing somewhere. The gas station emergency, Officer Chen said. Yeah, I remember. I wanted to let you know that you were right, Karen said. About the prices being legal and about me spiraling, you were right about that. Okay, Officer Chen said. Is there something I can help you with? I wanted to know, Karen paused. I wanted to know if there was something I was supposed to do, like what was the point of you making me read the prices? Because I'm still angry. I'm still angry, and now I'm also ashamed, and now my daughter's going into debt, and I'm no closer to understanding why this is allowed. She heard Officer Chen take a breath. I showed you the pump because I wanted you to see that reading it out loud doesn't change anything, Officer Chen said. I wanted you to see that the problem is bigger than one station. It's the system. And you can't fix the system by calling 911 or filing complaints or organizing a group chat. The system is designed to survive people like you trying to fix it. So we're just supposed to accept it. No, Officer Chen said. We're supposed to understand it, and then we're supposed to change it at the ballot box. We're supposed to vote for people who will create price controls, who will regulate the fuel industry, who will make the kind of legal framework that would make what David is doing actually illegal. But that takes collective action. That takes voting. That takes patience. What you've been doing, that's just you, angry and alone, trying to fight a war that's being fought in a boardroom and in Congress, not at a Chevron pump. Then I wasted everyone's time, Karen said. You educated some people. Officer Chen said, and Karen heard what might have been the smallest hint of sympathy in her voice. You made them aware. You started conversations. That's not nothing. But what you also did was burn yourself out trying to do it, and that's not good for anyone. After Karen hung up, she did something she hadn't done in 3 weeks. She closed her laptop and went to bed before midnight. She didn't know that Officer Chen was wrong about one thing. She didn't know that the group chat she'd started, the spreadsheets she'd created, the documentation she'd compiled, all of it had been forwarded to someone who actually had the power to do something about it. She didn't know that the Attorney General's office had received her complaint alongside 12 others, and had started looking at David's station alongside 17 others, and had begun to notice the pattern that she had noticed. She didn't know that her evidence was about to become part of a formal investigation. She didn't know that in 6 weeks, when the news broke about coordinated pricing across the region, when corporate executives were interviewed by the FTC, and when David's franchise location became the center of a legal case, that her name would be connected to it. She didn't know that Officer Chen would see the news and think about that woman in the parking lot reading pump prices out loud. She didn't know that David Okonkwo, caught in the middle, would spend 3 months defending himself to corporate lawyers before the settlement came down. She didn't know that Madison would graduate without the additional debt because there would be a class action settlement that would fund restitution. She didn't know any of it. All she knew, lying in her bed at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night, was that she'd lost something. Not just money, though that too. She'd lost certainty. She'd lost the feeling that if she just did the right thing, the system would work. She'd found out instead that the system was designed to make you lose that feeling. And that was its own kind of education. 6 weeks later, Karen was at her desk at Dalton and Associates when her phone buzzed with a news alert. Multi-million-dollar price-fixing investigation, RESULTS in settlements, the headline read. She clicked it. The article mentioned 17 gas stations across 3 counties. It mentioned a coordinated pricing scheme that had been in place for 8 months. It mentioned that the FTC had found evidence of deliberate price coordination through email directives sent by a parent company to franchisees. It mentioned corporate executives and lawyers and settlements and restitution. Halfway down the article, in a paragraph about how the investigation had started, it said, "Initial complaints from consumers in the area led authorities to examine pricing patterns more closely." It didn't use her name, it didn't give her credit, but it was there, her complaint, her documentation, her anger translated into evidence. Karen felt her heart rate accelerate. She immediately opened her personal email. 43 unread messages. The group chat had exploded. Patricia had texted, "Karen, look at this. You started this." But underneath the excitement, Karen felt something more complicated, because she'd spent the last 6 weeks trying not to think about this. She'd spent 6 weeks trying to repair her relationship with her job, with her family, with her own sense of reasonableness. She'd spent 6 weeks telling herself that Officer Chen was right, that the system was bigger, that she was small, that her anger was just one woman's response to something that couldn't be changed by one woman. And then it turned out she'd been wrong. Or rather, the timing had been wrong. If she'd just waited, if she'd just kept documenting, if she'd just held on for 6 more weeks instead of spiraling. Her boss, Tom, called her into his office that afternoon. "I saw the news," he said. "I put together that this was what you've been working on." Karen felt her stomach tighten. She'd hidden it well, or thought she had. "I'm sorry," she said. "It didn't interfere with my work." "Actually, it did," Tom said. "For several weeks you weren't present, but I'm not calling you in here to fire you." He paused. "Though I almost did, I'm calling you in here because I got a call from someone at the FTC. They wanted to know about you, about your character, your integrity, your reliability." Karen didn't say anything. "They're thinking about doing a larger investigation into corporate pricing across multiple sectors," Tom continued. "And they specifically asked if you were the kind of person they could work with. A consultant. Someone who understood documentation, who could follow evidence, who had shown initiative in identifying the problem." He leaned back in his chair. "Are you?" Karen thought about 6 weeks of spiraling. She thought about her daughter's debt. She thought about Officer Chen making her read the pump price out loud. She thought about David Okonkwo explaining the system to her. "Yes," she said, "I am." 4 months later, Corinne sat in a hotel conference room in a suit that matched her suit, which matched everything about her appearance, which was controlled and professional and completely different from the woman who'd called 911 about gas prices. There were 3 FTC investigators at the table. There was David Okonkwo with his lawyer. There was the Attorney General's office. There was corporate representation from the parent company that had coordinated the pricing. And there was evidence. Spreadsheets, emails, documents that Corinne had been instrumental in requesting, in understanding, in contextualizing. The documentation showed coordination at every level. It showed intent. It showed the mechanism of a system that had been designed to maximize profit at the expense of consumers. David's lawyer was arguing that David hadn't known the extent of the coordination, that he'd only been following corporate directives. The corporate lawyers were arguing that this was just market efficiency, that nothing illegal had occurred because no emergency had been declared. But the FTC had found something else. They'd found evidence of deliberate timing. They'd found emails that showed the parent company had coordinated price increases to maximize profit during a specific 2-month period when they knew demand would be high and alternate options would be limited. That was conspiracy. That was coordinated price fixing. That was illegal. The settlement came down in March. The company would pay $8.7 million in restitution to affected consumers. 17 franchisees would pay additional penalties ranging from $50,000 to $300,000 each. There would be corporate reforms. There would be oversight. Corinne's name appeared in the press release as a key observer who had documented preliminary evidence that prompted the investigation. Her daughter texted her, "Holy shit, Mom, you actually did it." Patricia from the group chat organized a celebration. 43 people met at a restaurant and talked about how they'd known something was wrong, how they'd decided to do something about it, how it had mattered. Corinne sat at the head of the table and felt almost nothing, because she understood now that David had been both right and wrong. The system was designed to survive people trying to fix it, but it was also designed to collapse periodically when enough people pushed at the same time, in the same direction, with the same documentation. She'd been one small push, but she'd also been the first push. 3 weeks after the settlement, Officer Sarah Chen called her directly. "I heard about the investigation," Sarah said without preamble. "I heard about the settlement. I wanted to say I owe you an apology." Corinne almost dropped the phone. "I told you that you couldn't fix the system by calling 911, Sarah continued. "I told you that you needed to accept it. I told you that I was teaching you something, but what I was really doing was telling you to give up. I was telling you to stop trying, and you didn't. You just found a different way to try." "Officer Chen." "Sarah," she corrected, "please." "Sarah, I spiraled for 6 weeks. I burned through my savings. I took out a loan that my daughter is going to be paying back for years. I was angry and obsessive and—" "Correct," Sarah said. "And then you used that to build a case. You used it as fuel instead of letting it be a fire that consumed you. That's different from what I thought you were doing. That's different from what I assumed you were doing." Corinne didn't know what to say. "I think I was wrong about you," Sarah said. "I think I've been wrong about a lot of people who call in with complaints. I've been dismissing them as spiraling when maybe some of them are actually trying." After they hung up, Corinne realized something. She'd called 911 at the right moment, not because it would change anything. It hadn't, but because she'd needed to break. She'd needed to hit a wall hard enough that she couldn't ignore what was happening. Officer Chen making her read the pump price out loud wasn't humiliation meant to teach her to accept the system. It was a mirror. It was showing her exactly how absurd the system was, how a woman had to read a pump price out loud to someone in authority for it to be acknowledged as ridiculous. The humiliation wasn't punishment, it was evidence. A year later, Corinne sat in her new office at a consulting firm specializing in corporate pricing investigations. She'd left Dalton and Associates. She'd taken the FTC consulting work and then the private sector opportunities that followed. Her daughter had graduated and was working at a nonprofit. Her ex-husband, well, one of them, had actually called to say he'd seen the news and that he was proud of her. On her desk was a framed photo of herself, Patricia, and the group chat members at their celebration dinner. Beneath it was something else, a gas pump receipt, from 6 weeks before everything changed. The pump that had started it all, $187.43. She'd framed it as a reminder of the moment when she'd decided that accepting something unjust was its own kind of spiral. Her phone rang, unknown number. "Ms. Whitmore," a man's voice, official, careful. "This is David Okonkwo. We haven't spoken since the settlement." Corinne's heart jumped. "I'm okay," David said immediately, understanding the reaction. "That's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because I wanted to apologize for dismissing you, for assuming you were spiraling, for explaining the system to you like I was letting you in on some kind of secret that made it acceptable." "David, I've spent a year working with the corporate office to implement the reforms," he said. "And I've realized something. I was complicit. I knew the prices didn't make sense. I knew the coordination existed. I just told myself it was normal market behavior and moved on. You wouldn't let me do that. You forced me to actually see what I was doing." After he hung up, Corinne realized that something had shifted in her understanding of the whole sequence of events. The humiliation Officer Chen had administered, that was real. David's complicity that she'd helped expose, that was real. Patricia and the group chat members and her spiraling and her daughter's debt, all of it was real. But what she'd been looking at as a failure, calling 911 about gas prices, being told it was inappropriate, being treated like she was crazy, that was actually the necessary first step. That was the moment where the problem had become visible enough to demand attention. She'd been trying to fix the system, and the system had told her she was crazy for trying. Most people would have stopped there. Most people would have accepted the diagnosis, would have gone home and built their lives around accepting what was unjust. Corinne had spiraled instead. She'd let herself come apart at the seams long enough to push back. And somewhere in that pushing, something had changed. 5 years after the settlement, Corinne sat across from a woman in the same parking lot where Officer Chen had made her read the pump price out loud. The woman's name was Jessica, and she was a college student working on a thesis about consumer activism and corporate accountability. "I want to understand what changed you," Jessica was asking. "What made you keep going when Officer Chen told you to accept it?" Corinne looked at the pump. The prices had stabilized in the years since the investigation. They were higher than they'd been before the whole crisis, but they weren't absurd. There was oversight now. There was accountability. "I didn't change," Corinne said. "That's what I think people don't understand. I didn't suddenly become brave or righteous. I just broke. And when I broke, instead of putting the pieces back together the way they were, I let them fall into a different shape." She paused. "Officer Chen tried to teach me acceptance. I learned resistance instead, not because I'm special, but because at that moment, for whatever reason, I needed it, and I was angry enough to let that need change me." That evening, Corinne drove past the Chevron one more time before heading home. The pump displayed $4.23 per gallon. Reasonable, almost normal. She didn't feel satisfied. She didn't feel like she'd won some cosmic victory. She felt like someone who'd been caught in a mechanism and had managed to change its settings by throwing herself against it hard enough to break both the mechanism and herself in the process.